My daughter was 6 years old when she leaned into my ear at my ex-husband's wedding and whispered, "Dad's new wife loves me more than you ever did." I just smiled and squeezed her hand. Nobody at that reception knew what I'd done 3 days earlier, or that by the time the cake was cut, one phone call was already waiting to change everything about the woman standing in that white dress. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a small house just outside Bozeman, Montana, the kind of house with a crooked porch step I keep meaning to fix and never do. I work as a dental hygienist at a clinic downtown, and most nights I come home smelling like antiseptic and fluoride, tired in that quiet way that doesn't show on your face but sits behind your eyes. My daughter Grace is 6. She has my husband's laugh and my stubborn streak, and she lives with me full-time since the divorce was finalized a year and a half ago. Her father, Rob, sees her every other weekend, sometimes less if a job runs long. Rob installs commercial HVAC systems, and back when we were married, that meant a lot of nights alone with a sleeping baby and a phone that didn't ring. We were married for 7 years. It wasn't one big explosion that ended it. It was smaller than that. It was me sitting at the kitchen table at 11 at night, eating cereal because I hadn't had time to make dinner, and realizing I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked me how my day was. I never cheated. He never hit me. We just stopped being a team somewhere around year 5, and by year 7, we were 2 people raising a kid in the same house who barely spoke, unless it was about scheduling. When I finally asked for the divorce, Rob didn't fight it. He didn't fight much of anything, actually, which almost made it worse. It's hard to be angry at someone who agrees with you. Rob started seeing Vanessa about 4 months after the papers were signed. She worked the front desk at one of his job sites, some office park out past the highway. She was younger than me, maybe 26, with the kind of effortless prettiness that made other women straighten their backs when she walked into a room. From what Grace told me after her visits, Vanessa did a lot of things I didn't have the energy for anymore. She braided Grace's hair in elaborate styles. She let her stay up late watching movies. She bought her a puppy for her birthday without asking anyone first. A golden retriever mix named Biscuit that Grace now talked about more than she talked about her own bedroom at my house. I never said one bad word about Vanessa to Grace. Not once. Even when Grace came home glowing about sleepovers at Dad's new place, about pancakes shaped like hearts, about a treehouse Rob was building in the backyard with Vanessa picking out the paint colors. I told myself a 6-year-old comparing 2 houses was normal, that kids notice glitter before they notice steadiness, and that someday she'd understand the difference. What Rob and Vanessa didn't know, what nobody at that wedding knew, was that 3 days before, I stood in that reception hall watching my daughter throw rose petals down the aisle. I'd made one phone call that was going to unravel, something neither of them saw coming. Here's something nobody at that wedding knew about me. Before I became a dental hygienist, I spent 6 years working the books for a property management company here in Gallatin County, the kind that handles rentals for landlords who don't want their names showing up anywhere public. I left that job when Grace was born, but I kept my license current, and 2 years ago, almost as a favor to my old boss, I started managing 3 rental properties on the side, quietly, under an LLC with my name buried in the paperwork where nobody thought to look. One of those properties was a renovated farmhouse out on Cottonwood Road. Nice place, updated kitchen, big yard. I'd never met the tenants. My old boss handled the applications, ran the credit checks, sent me the numbers. I just signed what needed signing and let the rent hit my account every month. It wasn't until 5 months ago, going through year-end paperwork, that I saw the lease renewal come across my desk with 2 names on it. Robert Carter, Vanessa Reyes. I sat with that for a long time before I said anything to anyone. I didn't do anything with it. Not right away. I told myself it didn't matter, that plenty of people rent from landlords they never meet, and that this was just one of those strange, small-world coincidences life hands you sometimes. I kept quiet through the engagement announcement. I kept quiet through the shower Vanessa's sister threw her, the one Grace came home from talking about for a week straight. I kept quiet right up until 3 days before the wedding, when Grace climbed into my lap after a weekend at Rob's and said, "So easy, so innocent." Vanessa said once we're married, maybe you won't need to come to my school stuff anymore. She didn't mean it as a knife. She was 6. She was just repeating something she'd heard, the way kids do. But it landed somewhere in me that had been quiet for a long time. And something shifted. That same night, I called my old boss, the one who still ran the property management side of things, and I asked her one question. I asked if the lease renewal on Cottonwood Road was final yet, or if there was still time to make a decision about it. She told me the paperwork hadn't been signed, not yet. I told her to hold it. Held that lease for 3 days without telling anyone, without saying a single word to Rob or Vanessa, and without letting it change one thing about how I acted at that rehearsal, dinner, or the morning of the wedding itself. I curled Grace's hair myself. I zipped up her little flower girl dress. I drove her to the venue, a barn out past Belgrade with string lights and mason jars, the kind of place that costs more to rent for 1 day than most people pay in a month of mortgage. I want to be honest. I wasn't sitting there plotting anything out of spite. I kept telling myself I was just a landlord making a business decision, the same way I would for any other tenant whose lease was coming up. But I also knew somewhere underneath that I was done quietly making things easy for people who'd never once thought to make anything easier for me. The ceremony went the way ceremonies go. Vanessa looked beautiful, I'll give her that. Rob cried when he saw her walk down the aisle, which was more emotion than I remember him showing in the last 2 years we were married. Grace walked ahead of her, dropping rose petals, so proud of her little basket she could barely stand it. At the reception, after the toasts, after the first dance, Grace found her way back to my table and climbed up next to me. She smelled like cake frosting and the lavender lotion Vanessa apparently used on her hands. She leaned in close, the way kids do when they think they're sharing a secret, and she whispered it right against my ear. Dad's new wife loves me more than you ever did. I felt it land somewhere deep. That particular kind of sting that comes from your own child, the person you'd give up everything for, saying the one thing you never wanted to hear out loud. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct her. I just smiled, tucked a piece of hair behind her ear, and told her to go find Rob for the next dance. Across the room, Vanessa caught my eye for just a second and gave me this small, satisfied smile, like she knew exactly what Grace had said, like maybe she'd even planted the seed of it herself sometime that week. I smiled back. I even raised my glass a little when Rob looked over. Nobody at that reception had any idea that 2 days earlier, I'd already told my old boss to send the non-renewal notice on Cottonwood Road, the standard 30-day letter required by Montana law. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, just a landlord deciding not to continue a lease. Nobody knew that the honeymoon Rob and Vanessa were leaving for the next morning was going to end with them coming home to a house that was no longer theirs to live in. I just kept smiling, and I danced with my daughter one more time before the night was over. Rob and Vanessa got back from their honeymoon on a Sunday. By Tuesday, Grace called me from Rob's phone, confused, saying there were boxes everywhere and Vanessa was crying in the kitchen. I kept my voice calm and asked her about her day at school instead. Whatever was happening between the adults, I wasn't going to let it land on a 6-year-old. Rob called me that night, and I could hear it in his voice before he even said it. The landlord wasn't renewing their lease. 30 days to be out, right in the middle of setting up a new marriage. He asked if I knew anything about rentals out that way, maybe through my old job. I told him I'd ask around, which wasn't a lie, since I already knew more than I planned on saying that night. It took 2 more weeks before Vanessa put it together. Going through the paperwork looking for the property management company's name, finding an LLC and doing what people do now, looking it up online. She called Rob first and Rob called me, quiet in a way I hadn't heard from him in years, and asked if I owned that house. I told him the truth. Yes, I did, through the company I'd managed for years, long before either of them had ever moved in, back when I still had a life connected to that old job. I told him I hadn't done anything illegal or sneaky, just made a business decision the same way any landlord might, and that I was sorry it landed the way it did, right after the wedding. He didn't ask me why. I think some part of him already knew. 3 weeks later, Rob and Vanessa found a smaller place across town, on their own this time. Grace still spends every other weekend at Rob's. Still comes home talking about Biscuit the dog and pancakes shaped like hearts. And I still never say one bad word about Vanessa in front of her. But something shifted after that. Vanessa's smiles at pickup got a little smaller, a little more careful. And one night, months later, tucking Grace into bed, she looked up at me and said, out of nowhere, "You're not a loser. Mom, you're just quiet." I kissed her forehead and turned off the light. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without replaying that whisper at the wedding over and over in my head. If you made it this far, I hope you take one thing away from my story. Being quiet has never once meant being weak. If this story meant something to you, hit that subscribe button, because there are a lot more stories like mine still coming.